Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another AxIT chat with myself, Andrew, and I'm really excited to have our special guest here today, Megan Blair from Bureta Physio Wellness in Tauranga. Megan, how are you going today?
I'm great, thank you. Really excited to have a bit of a chat about all things AxIT.
Awesome to hear. Awesome to hear. I tend to find I'm the one who's kind of always really excited,
Yeah.
chatting about it. So it's good to have someone else kind of on board to chat to in that respect. Now, today, is a day of firsts actually in many respects. It's the first time we're going live on our YouTube channel, kind of experimenting with that. So, and I notice already we've got a few people who are tuning in live. So, welcome to all those who are joining us, particularly if you have any comments or any interactions. I believe there is a comments or a chat field there that you can kind of interact with. We will be able to kind of see some of that, and potentially if you have any questions or anything like that, we might save those until the end. But in terms of other firsts as well, it's the first time I've had the opportunity to do one of these chats with someone or one of our customers or users over in NZ, which I think is really awesome because New Zealand is really, I think, leading the charge a bit in terms of the importance of objective assessment in practice, particularly with some of the changes recently with some of the ACC pathways and things like that. So we might get into talking about that. And of course, it would be really important to speak to someone like yourself because Bureta Physio Wellness were probably one of our first adopters from across the ditch in NZ. So I'm really excited to kind of get into that. But maybe, setting the scene there, I want to maybe set the scene for yourself, Megan, as well. Maybe tell us a little bit about your story. How did you get involved becoming a physio, joining Bureta? How did that all kind of come about?
Yeah, in terms of becoming a physio, I think at school I was just kind of like, what am I interested in? What am I good at? What do I like doing? And it came down to a few things. I've always just interested in human movement, how the body works, always been keen on sports and just helping people in general. So physio seemed like a good fit. So headed on down to Dunedin, did my study down there, finished up in 2018. And then I've worked in private practice since. I worked in Masterton, which is in the Wairarapa area in the North Island. Worked there for about 3.5 years. And then came on up to Tauranga nearing around 18-20 months or so ago. So yeah, predominantly private practice. I'm primarily a sports physiotherapist, worked with a few different sports, different teams, but I do work across a range of different things, lots of the ACC contracts, so the concussion, pain management, a little bit in the VOC space, more on the rehab side, do a little bit of vestibular rehab. I've done my postgrad study in strength and conditioning, so that's definitely my main interest area, and is probably what has then drawn me into, I guess, being quite probably enthusiastic with my use of AxIT technology and general objective measures since then, and that was partly why I made the shift up to Tauranga as well. I kind of saw the job advertisement, saw that the AxIT tech was in use, and I'd been learning quite a bit about force plates and measures and how that can be used more so in a strength and conditioning realm, given the papers I was doing, but certainly started to pick up the benefits of using that in the rehab space. And so that was a key driver for kind of applying for the job at Bureta and accepting that. And then, been using that technology kind of ever since I started here. Yeah.
It's funny because it's a consistent story, where people kind of gravitate towards physiotherapy or other kind of health services. It's often I don't want to say like the failed sports person, but it's kind of the people who are really into it, but maybe never kind of we're able to kind of take that step, but we end up kind of helping those individuals maybe try to.
Not good enough to crack it at anything, so try and
Sure.
get involved through other realms. Yeah.
Don't worry, you're describing me as well. And I wanted to kind of delve into kind of your work there at Bureta. I mean, Jacinta and the team, I speak to people in New Zealand. Everyone seems to know the team at Bureta. So I'm sure there was definitely some draw to be part of that team and kind of working alongside that. Can you describe to me, like, the philosophy of that team, or like, how does the day-to-day practice kind of work, or like, what kind of drives that team?
I guess we are quite driven on trying to deliver the best service, possible, in a very well-rounded service that's quite, outcome driven, but then making sure that that's delivered, in a friendly, personable way. But I guess I'd say maybe excellence is the bare minimum, like you're always aiming to do extremely well, and then anything beyond that is great. That's probably a key thing of Bureta, is trying to offer the absolute best service possible, which is probably why we utilize quite a bit of technology.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are obviously innovators and kind of thinking, I guess, a step ahead in terms of that service delivery, which I think, a lot of people who are adopting technology in practice probably classify themselves as that, if, they have kind of used it up until this kind of point. But I guess we're starting to see that kind of transition where technology is now becoming a little bit more I guess, normal in practice, and people are starting to use it more. Physiotherapy and health services have probably been a little slower to adopt kind of new tools and tech in the past, but it is becoming a little bit more mainstream, certainly with what we're seeing. What are you finding with, because you mentioned to me kind of offline that you have some involvement, I guess, in working with the new team members that kind of come on board at Bureta and potentially helping them with AxIT and things like that. How are you finding their kind of thought process with that as well?
Well, I think, as you said, like physiotherapy is changing a bit. So when we've had new grads come in and younger staff members, like they're quite ready and quite open just to adopting, kind of using these measures. They're already in that mindset of things being quite outcome driven and things need to be very measurable, and so having that kind of tech that can give you that measurable data instantly, it's just a bit of a no-brainer really for them. So they kind of pick it up quite easy and just run with it. And even if they're not 100% on interpreting what it's telling them, it's fine, because they can still do the measuring, and then they can just bring it along to mentoring sessions, or come up to one of the more senior staff and just be like, hey, I've done this. This is what I'm thinking, but what do you think? So they seem to have no trouble. If anything, they are probably the most enthusiastic ones to pick it up. Like if we look at our clinic, it's the younger staff by far that are the key users by it. And then we have a couple of the more experienced ones like Jackson Blair that will utilize it as well. But otherwise, it's primarily more the younger sports physios in the clinic that do use it.
That's awesome. I mean, I think, it probably says old dinosaurs like myself, we need to maybe learn a couple new tricks, potentially in that respect.
It's quite good. So, like if some of the other physios don't necessarily pick it up, they'll still recognize when it's helpful and just be like, hey, I've booked them in. Can you do this testing and let me know what you find? So still using it in a roundabout way, which is good. Yeah.
That is interesting, actually, because we do hear from some of our users that one of the great things about the technology too is that, it does allow kind of practitioners to share clients, amongst themselves in that team environment a lot more, because, it's not reliant on maybe your certain practice style or your personality or things like that. It's just about kind of measuring and driving outcomes.
Yeah.
Tell me, though, a little bit then about you know, how do you you mentioned that the younger team are obviously naturally engaged with tech and things like that. You know, they've probably grown up with technology. It's relatively intuitive for them to kind of use this type of stuff. But tell me how, like, when someone maybe starts off at Bureta, like, how do you make sure that they kind of on board with these kind of tools and things like that? Because I imagine, you know, I mean, your experience and probably still the experience of the young physios is that they're not exactly specifically taught how to do this stuff at university. So they have to learn when they join, you know, the team at Bureta and things like that. How does that happen?
Yeah, they definitely aren't exposed to it, but it's just in our onboarding process, really. So obviously when new staff start, they'll be paired up, you know, with a more senior staff member for mentoring, and so we can run through the use of that in those sessions. But typically what we will do, obviously when new staff start, their diary's a little bit lighter, so we'll get them set up on the Strength by Numbers website. There's gazillion different videos on there of how to do every single test. And so when they've got free time, it's like, okay, go look at the hip assessment tests, go look at all the push-up ones for the hip and run through that. We're quite fortunate. Usually we have a couple of new staff tending to start at the same time, like at the start of the year. So recently, Emma and Soumya, they've just been watching some videos, or we'll cover it in mentoring, and then it's blocked out in their diary and they will just practice together, go through the test, practice on each other. And then later on, we'll catch up and get them to practice it on us and make sure that technique is good and tweak things there. But by and large, it's quite self-driven just by the videos that are online, and then, yeah, slight little tweaks to things when we get them to test on us. So it's quite good. It doesn't actually involve too much admin from pre-existing staff because all of the videos are there. Yeah.
We do like to try and make practitioners' jobs easier. So I'm glad to hear that we're kind of at least taking a little bit of that kind of mentoring load off you guys.
Yeah.
In that respect. Have you got an idea though of, like, you know, because I think people, I think maybe sometimes business owners and practitioners, you know, when they're taking on new team members, they might actually underestimate, like, the time that it takes for someone to, you know, just get competent and really kind of on board, fully into the way in which you deliver your services, maybe how to use, you know, some of the tools, whether that be AxIT or other things as well. Have you got, like, an idea or a feeling of, like, you know, how much time and how long does it take, you know, for that new practitioner to really kind of get to that level where they are kind of, you know, feeling really competent in kind of using stuff like this?
I guess if I base it off the new grads that we had in our clinic last year, probably within that, like, 6 month space, they were pretty happy with, say, doing the ankle, the hip, the shoulder. Those are probably 3 key ones that we'll nail in, and then, like, your basic kind of quad extension, hamstring extension, and the knee. So I'd say they're very, very happy with using those along with some force plate ones around 6 months, and then it's just like the additional probably another 6 months, to be fair, of just really, like, you know, remembering that tech is there and you can use it and when to implement it with the client, and just getting used to retesting it rather than just doing all this great stuff at the start and then never kind of going back to it. So I'd probably say, like, a good year to really get an understanding of when to use it and kind of widespread use of it. But we kind of just went almost like one body area at a time, and we tend to start with the hip because it's probably like the push-up we would use that the most. So it seems to be our starting point. And once they're super happy with the hip and they've been using that for a month, then we'll go, okay, new body area, the ankle, right? We're going to focus on the ankle, and that's this month's one, alongside still using it with your hip. So we just gradually built it through like that. Otherwise, yeah, it's probably quite overwhelming if you just throw everything at them in one go and go, okay, now go use this. And they'll go, I can't remember how to use all of those. Yeah. So I'd say probably a good year.
I think really that's great but it's great. It's great that you guys, like, take the time to, you know, develop the skills in those new team members, because that's the thing that is going to obviously, not just help the clientele that you guys see, but help the business in such a way, making sure that there's such a standard of service. It's obviously a reason why Bureta is such a such a great place to work for, and so renowned. As I was kind of saying before. Do you find though with AxIT, so coming now, I mean that kind of makes sense on how you get like the team members obviously involved and using it and things like that. Do you find like are there certain is there a certain way in which AxIT like tends to get implemented in your services? Like, I mean, in the first session with a client, like does it feature somewhere there, or does it feature, kind of more in a certain other part of the ongoing service delivery from, maybe acute to kind of ongoing management, things like that?
Yeah, I guess for us, like I get quite a certain approach into how that first initial assessment is not necessarily aimed at a treatment point of view, but just like really establishing what the diagnosis is and then what the plan is moving forward. So quite often, no, AxIT won't present in that first session because you'll be doing some of your other kind of orthopedic testing and coming up with that diagnosis and then sitting down and talking people through what that is. But then we'll start queuing into it in that first session and say, okay, if it's quite an acute ankle sprain, you obviously spend your time settling things down. And once that kind of pain inhibition has resolved, then we'll go, that's when we'll do some strength testing. If it's a bit more of a chronic one, like someone's had, ankle sprain 1 year ago and they're having ongoing instability, and that's why they're kind of finally presenting to physio, then again, I'll run through some other basic tests in that first assessment, like your general mobility and joint range and rah-de-rah, so endurance testing. And then I'll say, cool, next session, we're looking at strength, we're looking at balance, possibly plyometric capacity, depending on where they're at. And then we just get a really good idea of where to go rehab-wise from there. So probably not the first, and then it just depends how acute they are as to when we will bring it in.
That's great. That's really clear. How do the clients kind of engage with the data? Like, do you find that they kind of are they interested in it? Are they motivated by it? Are they engaged by it?
I'd say like 97% of them are very interested in it. I think, for so long, you go to physio, you get exercises, you get told, oh, you need to do this to get stronger, but often there's been no proof as to like why they need to get stronger other than the physio has kind of said it. Whereas now we can say, look, like we've got this, we can test it, we can figure out exactly where, your weak points are, and then go after that and prescribe exercises based on it. And so when people see the data, like often it's quite a realization point, like, oh God, like I actually need to do some work. And it then just sets a strong foundation for them to kind of commit to their rehab, because some of them are, a little bit worried when they come back from like retesting that their numbers won't change. No one wants to see that. So it is a bit of a motivating point. But a lot of them are quite interested because, it is just nice to see, okay, I know why I need to do this rehab now. So I find it good for that.
It's really interesting. When we first got involved, we were probably thinking that AxIT was more a tool to help us from a decision-making standpoint as practitioners. We'd identify the deficiencies or see the imbalances and, track the progress and make sure that people were on track so that we were giving like the best exercises or had the best plan. But strangely, it's like a lot of the value is also just in that kind of education component, right? Like having the visuals and the data and the information to be able to have better conversations with the client around where they're at and why they're there and how this relates to their presentation, is really empowering, I think, in that respect, not just obviously for us from our decision making, but just for the client in terms of their engagement in the program. And
yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the best parts about it, because obviously physios are naturally inclined to, want to get the best and do this and do that and do the exercises, and that's our bias. Like, we like to give out exercises and expect that people will, kind of maybe be as excited about doing them as we are prescribing them. Whereas you can actually use it as an educational tool really nicely, and it just sets the foundation of, okay, this is why we need to do these things. It's quite good from a prioritization point as well, because some people just don't have the time, so I can sit there and go, okay, these are great, these are a little bit average, these are like your key work on. So if you do nothing else, I just need you to do exercise A, exercise B, and that will get you somewhere. So you can be quite specific versus, I guess, some of your protocols that might have 10 or 12 different exercises that people have got to do. And that's just a bit overwhelming, so they don't do any. Whereas if you can chase after the two key weak things, you'll get somewhere more so than the nothing bunch. Yeah.
That's such an important point, right? I think, like, sometimes for us as practitioners, like, there's how we would manage things in the ideal world. But obviously we always need to consider the client in front of us too, right? And sometimes you're right, like maybe that 80-20 approach of kind of managing people, like what's the 20% of things that's going to get us 80% improvement? By having that data, you really can, I guess, prioritize or try and select the thing that's going to give you the most bang for your buck.
Yeah, and patients appreciate that, because they're like, oh, okay, I haven't been overloaded with stuff. I know which one I specifically need to do. And we do notice that people then just go away and, they're quite happy to just focus on that one or that two. And then, with that habit, they then might get used to doing more, and that's cool. But if they don't, at least they've done the couple that, is probably going to get them the best outcome. So.
Absolutely. No, that's great. That's really great. Just for those who are viewing, if you do have any questions for Megan, like, please feel free to kind of add them into the chat or the comments there, and we can get them at the end. My next question, I guess, is, this is probably me coming from some ignorance as well. Obviously, being over in Australia, our systems are a little bit different to those over in NZ. But have you found any kind of efficiencies or optimizations that have helped kind of by using AxIT and things like that with how things work with the ACC, or, particularly with, I guess, some of the new developments that are coming into play with some of the new pathways and things like that?
Yeah, definitely. So I've worked lots under the escalated care pathways, the knee one in particular, basically from when I started here at Bureta, and then picked up the spinal one maybe at some point early last year. And so I heavily used it in the knee escalated care pathway, because I basically saw all of the ACLs that came through our clinic. And so it was great for milestone testing, because you just got so much information that you can then use as your clinical justification for what you're doing. And so basically every single one that I had, I would run out of budget. And it's partly because I've done my strength and conditioning stuff. So, I'll go down to the field with them and use up a lot of my budget doing field-based stuff as well. But then it meant when I had to go to the administrative people of these ECPs and I'd say, hey, I need, 4 hours, 6 hours more budget. This is why, this is where the person's sitting at. This is how long I expect them to take to get this measure up to where we need it for return to sport. The objective data was so clear that I didn't have any that went, no, we can't justify that. Like, they just said, okay, yep, we approve. And I got my funding for that and carried on. Versus, and if you're a little bit wishy-washy and you said, oh, they're not quite there yet, and I think they need, 4 more weeks, and I can't really tell you where exactly they're at, but they're just not quite ready, then they might be like, we can't justify giving you that. So I found it very, very, easy to be able to request more funding for under those programs, having such reliable data to give them. And so we're transferring into that integrated care pathway, which it may be completely different, how they run those. I think the escalated care pathway was a bit of a pilot study, and they're quite happy to get literally anyone on board, and they wanted good outcomes, so they were quite open with their wallets in that regard. But I imagine it's similar with the integrated care pathway, because it is very outcome focused. And so if you can prove that you haven't yet got your outcome, and you've got a rough idea how long it's going to take, because you've got a strength measure or a power measure in front of you, and you know realistically how long it takes to get an improvement in those variables, then again, you shouldn't have any issue justifying your need for more budget in those scenarios. So I found that quite useful, quite a useful tool for that. And just showing my clients as well, for the ones that, were really, really keen to get back to sport, to be like, actually, look, we're just not quite there yet. And they can see it and be like, okay, not quite.
I think that's just so awesome, and that's why I said at the start, I really feel like New Zealand are really leading the way in this kind of approach. It's been talked about for a long period of time, this concept of results-based care, where the services and the reimbursement that you get for those services are just based on the results, right? And so however you need to achieve them, you go about it and you do it and you get the results, and you'll be reimbursed, accordingly for it, as opposed to, I guess, the way in which things are here in Australia is probably more, reimbursement for the number of services and things like that. And, we hope that everyone's getting the most out of those services, but it does put a lot of unnecessary strain on those kind of systems. So I definitely feel like what's happening over there, and obviously therefore then the need for objective assessment tools is only going to mean that just the outcomes for New Zealand as a whole, and driving kind of healthy communities and things like that will just be far superior, which is awesome to hear. You mentioned the those kind of ACL milestones and things like that. Do you have any interesting stories or anything where maybe you thought one thing and then kind of, I don't know, maybe AxIT kind of helped you find another kind of result or something like that? Because we do hear kind of stories where, obviously, us as practitioners, we see a lot of clients, we may have certain biases in terms of what we think is the story or what's going on, but actually the data, doesn't lie. So sometimes it reveals something else.
Yeah, I'd say the one key one I've noticed that I probably wouldn't have picked up on otherwise is a lot of the, when I've done horizontal hop testing, so I'll set the plate up along the kind of 6 meter kind of blue line marking on the floors that we've got in our gym, and I'll get them to hop so I can measure force on the plate and rate of force development, but also get distance at the same time. And what I have often picked up is that people will get symmetrical hop distances, but their forced output is actually not symmetrical, maybe in the realm of 10 to 20% less, when we know ideally we actually get the injured limb 110% better than the uninjured one. So if we just went on distance alone, I wouldn't pick that up. And usually it's come down to slight variations in their technique of hopping. And so I've got into the habit of, okay, if I see that, I'll then video them as well. And often you don't pick it up, just with the naked eye, because it's a quick movement. But as soon as you video it, you do see some subtle differences in their mechanics of how to hop. And so you start playing around with that, and then, they tidy themselves up. But it's just things I wouldn't have picked that up otherwise. I would have just gone, hop distance is equal, easy, off we go. And so same with that, you can kind of pick up that they're also quite slow at developing that force. And again, you just get an idea of, okay, what might we need to work on just to shift you from being great to amazing with things. So So yeah, that's probably one I've picked up. On the ACLs, on the other hand, I found people are actually really, really quick at getting their knee extension strength back. And I think that's something we go quite hard on now. But I've been quite surprised at how slow the hamstring comes back with our hamstring grafts. And often, I think I tend to see a little bit more symmetry in some of the rep-max testing, say like a seated hamstring curl scenario, but then that won't match up with what I get on my force testing. I'll still see that the graft side is quite down. So I found it useful for that, for actually being a little bit more specific with how the graft hamstring is going too.
That was always the interesting one for me. I always found with the ACLs, you might get even, for example, like the quad extension strength, like on a leg extension machine might be quite even. Even the peak force when we're measuring it using our isometric dynamometry with AxIT might be quite even in terms of the force that they're generating. But say the rate of force development or the speed of that contraction might still be miles off. And, without those kind of tools, it was probably the type of thing before we had AxIT, it was really, we just really didn't have any idea of that quality, in the kind of rehab space. So, there were probably areas where, I was probably guilty of letting athletes or clients maybe return to sport or activity when they still had some interesting discrepancies or imbalances that were potentially setting them up for failure.
Yeah, I'd probably say I notice it most in the like the quality of the force curve. So yeah, you're right, they get similar peak force and their rep-max testing is similar, but then you look at their force curve and one of them hits that force and it stays consistent, and then you see their injured one and it slowly climbs up, or it's all over the show and you're like, okay, actually this still got quite a motor control, like recruitment issue there. So they've got good strength, but they can't actually utilize it. So yeah, that is quite a handy thing to be able to see.
Interesting examples. Look, we're kind of coming to the end of our chat. I've got a couple more questions. Number one, for practitioners in NZ, and with some of the new developments obviously that are happening with some of those pathways and stuff like that, have you got any advice for practitioners who are maybe looking at these type of tools and these type of technologies? Like, what are some things that they should consider, in terms of selecting a product, or when they are looking to implement it? Are there things that they should be thinking about or aware of, to make sure that they get the most out of it and do it the best?
Yeah, I'd probably say one would be looking at how easy the data you get can be interpreted. Because obviously the AxIT data, it does all the interpreting and analyzing for you and presents it quite nicely with a body weight percentage, which seems to be a much more palatable measure compared to just getting a raw kind of force output in newtons. Like, oh, you did an isometric mid-thigh pull 3,500 newtons. No one in the physio world knows what that means, and clients certainly don't. Versus if you can put it in reference to body weight, people just seem to be able to interpret that, and it's a lot easier to explain. So I think presentation of data, if it can be automatically converted and it's there for you, that's a helpful thing, because obviously we don't have time to go and then sit down and break it down and find out what the normative data is and where this person is, and then go, oh, okay, this is what they need to work on. AxIT has all that on the screen, so you've got it all there. So that would be my kind of number one thing, is just make sure whatever you go for, the data is easily presented so that you're not put off by it being too much work, too much time when the client's not here. Number two would probably be the portability of it. That's probably the other aspect I like about AxIT. I work across a couple of different sites. And so if I've got athletes over at the surf club, I'm like, okay, I just need to test their shoulder out and I can't get them in clinic here. I'll just take the pusher, the puller over there, take the tablet over, and I can test that quite nicely because it's not a big frame, it's not fixed to anything. it doesn't need to be plugged in. It just works. So I quite like that side of things as well. Those probably be my two. Make sure the data is easy, make sure it's kind of user friendly.
It's definitely our kind of bias to this type of stuff as well, that's for sure. My last question is a bit of like a future thought, question. You're obviously a tech adopter, but like, what do you envision for the future, like when it comes to technology and physiotherapy? Like, how do you see technology's role continuing to, I guess, influence what we do?
Yeah, I guess there's, a general adoption of technology from, everyone, day-to-day people. Like if you look at the rise of like wearables, like your Garmin watch and your Apple watch, like people are obviously interested in data. You've got people who are just, recreational walkers, and they might take their dog out for 20 minutes and they've still got a watch that gives them far more information than they will ever need, but they love looking at it. So I think there's always going to be a want for it from clients, and so I think that would be something to consider. Is that might be a draw card, for people to come to your clinic if you've actually got that. I guess for New Zealand, ACC is going more and more outcome driven. They might want to become more specific with their outcomes in the future. At the moment, they're quite open in terms of what you use, because they know that not everyone has technology, but they may come, at some point down the track where they would like to have technology as a measure point to justify their spending a little bit more clearly. So I think it will become of use more and more and more, driven by what clients want and potentially what ACC might want to.
And hopefully, the end result of that is that actually we all just, provide better outcomes for the people that we work with, and the communities that we work with, live healthier and better lives. So look, Megan, this chat has been awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your insights into not just using AxIT, but, kind of how, I guess, tools and technologies can help empower everyday health and fitness professionals in NZ. Once again, yourself and the Bureta team are obviously a real credit to your communities in Tauranga. So thanks again for your time, and I hope everyone has enjoyed the chat.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thank you for having me.